Richard Thornwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, surveying the city below like a king observing his kingdom. At 72, he was one of America's wealthiest men, his fortune built on real estate, tech investments, and a ruthless business acumen that had crushed countless competitors. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his custom Italian suit immaculate. Everything about him screamed power and control, but Richard harbored secrets that his carefully curated public image concealed. Behind closed doors, he was a man whose prejudices ran deep, beliefs inherited from his father and grandfather, beliefs he'd never questioned or challenged. He saw people as categories, hierarchies, worth determined by the color of their skin. In 1998, Richard's company was smaller but growing fast. He employed hundreds of people, and among them was Maya Johnson, a brilliant young black woman who worked in his accounting department. Maya was 23, fresh out of college with a degree in finance, and despite facing constant microaggressions and being passed over for promotions she deserved, she worked harder than anyone else. She needed the job to support her aging mother and younger siblings. Richard noticed Maya, but not for her talents. To him, she was just another employee, someone beneath him in every way that mattered to his twisted worldview. But one night, after a company party where too much alcohol flowed freely, Richard made a decision that would alter multiple lives forever. Maya had stayed late to finish a report. Richard, emboldened by drinks and his sense of untouchability, cornered her in the office. What happened that night was not consensual, though Richard would spend years convincing himself otherwise, rewriting the memory to absolve his guilt. Maya, terrified of losing her job and knowing that no one would believe her word against his, remained silent. 6 weeks later, Maya discovered she was pregnant. Maya sat in the dingy bathroom of her small apartment in Queens, staring at the positive pregnancy test with tears streaming down her face. She knew exactly when it had happened. There had been no one else. The weight of her situation crushed down on her, a single mother-to-be, working for the father of her child who didn't even see her as fully human, unable to afford proper prenatal care on her meager salary. She quit her job the next week, giving no explanation. Richard barely noticed her departure, just another faceless employee moving on. Maya never told him about the pregnancy. What would be the point? He would deny it, destroy her credibility, maybe even accuse her of trying to extort him. She knew how the world worked, especially for women who looked like her, making accusations against powerful white men. Maya moved back to Philadelphia to live with her mother. She worked 3 jobs while pregnant, saving every penny. When her son was born on a cold February morning in 1999, she named him Marcus, a strong name for what she hoped would become a strong man. Marcus grew up never knowing his father's identity. Maya told him only that his father had been someone she worked with briefly, someone who didn't know he existed, and that they were better off on their own. She poured all her love, energy, and resources into raising her son. Despite their poverty, despite the struggles, Maya made sure Marcus had books, encouragement, and unwavering support. Marcus was brilliant. He excelled in school, earning scholarships that allowed him to attend a prestigious prep school and later Princeton University. He studied business and computer science, driven by a desire to lift his family out of poverty and to prove that he could succeed despite the odds stacked against him. But Marcus also grew up with questions. Who was his father? Why had his mother become so sad and distant whenever he asked? As he got older, he noticed how his mother flinched at certain news stories, how she changed the channel when certain names appeared on television. It wasn't until Maya was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in 2024 that she finally told Marcus the truth. Marcus sat beside his mother's hospital bed, holding her frail hand. At 51, Maya looked far older, the cancer and years of hard work having taken their toll. The beeping of monitors provided a steady rhythm to the conversation that would change Marcus's life forever. "Baby, there's something I need to tell you," Maya whispered, her voice weak. "Something I should have told you years ago." Marcus leaned closer. "What is it, Mom?" And then she told him everything. About Richard Thornwood. About that night in the office. About her fear and silence. About the pregnancy she'd hidden and the decision she'd made to raise Marcus alone rather than subject either of them to Richard's denial and cruelty. Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him. Richard Thornwood, the billionaire whose face appeared regularly in business magazines, whose companies Marcus had actually studied in business school. The man known for his philanthropy and whose recent donations to various causes had earned him favorable press coverage. "Why didn't you ever tell him?" Marcus asked, his voice strained. Maya squeezed his hand weakly. "Because I knew who he was, baby. I knew he would never acknowledge you. I knew he would try to destroy us both. And I couldn't let him do that to you. I wanted you to grow up knowing your worth, not seeing yourself through his hateful eyes." "He raped you," Marcus said, the words bitter in his mouth. Maya was quiet for a moment. "The world might not call it that. I worked for him. I was in his office late. He was drunk. He had all the power, and I had none. I said no, but my no didn't matter to him. I've spent 27 years trying to reconcile what happened, trying to move forward. But yes, Marcus. He violated me in every way that mattered. Marcus felt rage building inside him like nothing he'd ever experienced. This man, this racist, powerful man, was his biological father. Half of Marcus's DNA came from someone who would probably despise him if they ever met, someone who had hurt his mother and never faced consequences. I need proof, Marcus said finally. I need to know for certain. Maya nodded. In my dresser, bottom drawer, there's an envelope. I kept everything from that time, pay stubs showing I worked there, the date, even the clothes I wore that night. I never washed them. I don't know why. Maybe part of me always knew you'd need proof one day. 3 weeks later, Maya passed away peacefully in her sleep, Marcus by her side. And 1 week after that, armed with DNA evidence from his mother's kept belongings and his own genetic sample, Marcus received confirmation. Richard Thornwood was indeed his biological father. Marcus spent months planning his approach. He wasn't interested in money, his career in tech had made him comfortable, if not wealthy. He didn't want media attention. What he wanted was simple, he wanted Richard Thornwood to face the truth of what he'd done. He wanted accountability. Marcus hired a private investigator to learn everything about Richard's current life. He discovered that Richard was preparing to launch a new charitable foundation focused on urban youth development, a thinly veiled PR campaign to improve his image amid recent controversies about discriminatory practices in his real estate holdings. The foundation's gala was scheduled for a Saturday evening in October 2025 at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It would be attended by politicians, celebrities, and business leaders. Richard would give a speech about his commitment to helping underprivileged communities. Marcus secured an invitation through a business connection, using his mother's maiden name on the RSVP. He arrived in a tailored tuxedo, looking every bit the successful young professional he'd become. At 26, Marcus was tall and handsome, with his mother's warm brown eyes and features that, if one looked closely, bore an unmistakable resemblance to a younger Richard Thornwood. The gala was extravagant, ice sculptures, champagne fountains, a string quartet playing in the Great Hall. Marcus moved through the crowd, watching Richard work the room with practiced charm, shaking hands and accepting congratulations on his generous commitment to social justice. The irony made Marcus's stomach turn. When Richard took the stage to give his speech, Marcus positioned himself in the second row, directly in his line of sight. Richard spoke eloquently about giving back to communities in need, about creating opportunities for those less fortunate, about his belief that every young person deserves a chance to succeed regardless of their background. The applause was thunderous when he finished. And then, as Richard stepped down from the podium, Marcus stood up. "Mr. Thornwood," Marcus called out, his voice clear and strong, cutting through the polite chatter. "I have a question." The room quieted. Richard turned, his smile professional but his eyes showing a flash of irritation at the interruption. "Yes, young man? Do you remember Maya Johnson? She worked in your accounting department in 1998. The color drained slightly from Richard's face, though he recovered quickly. "I've employed thousands of people over the years." "I'm afraid I don't recall. Let me refresh your memory," Marcus interrupted, taking a step forward. "She was 23 years old. She stayed late one night after a company party to finish a report. You cornered her in your office. You assaulted her. She got pregnant. She quit shortly after and raised your son alone while you built your empire and never faced any consequences for what you did." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Security began moving toward Marcus, but he continued, his voice rising. "That son is me. I'm Marcus Johnson, and I'm your biological son. I have DNA evidence. I have my mother's testimony, recorded before she died 3 months ago. I have the clothes she wore that night, never washed, with your DNA on them. I have pay stubs proving she worked for you, time-stamped security logs showing when she left the building that night, after you did." Richard's face had gone from pale to crimson. "This is outrageous. Security, remove this man. This is clearly some sort of scam. I don't want your money," Marcus said calmly, even as security guards approached. "I want everyone in this room to know who you really are. You stand here talking about helping urban youth, about creating opportunities for people like me, when you raped my black mother and never acknowledged my existence. You're not a philanthropist. You're not a good man. You're a racist predator who's spent decades hiding behind wealth and PR campaigns." The guards reached Marcus, but he didn't resist. He'd said what he came to say. As they escorted him toward the exit, cameras flashed, guests pulling out their phones, capturing every moment. The story would be everywhere by morning. Richard stood frozen on the stage, his carefully constructed image crumbling around him. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny everything, but no words came out. Because somewhere in his eyes, there was a flicker of recognition. Maybe he did remember Maya. Maybe he'd always remembered but had convinced himself it didn't matter. Wait, Richard finally said, his voice barely audible. Wait. The security guards paused. The room fell completely silent. Richard Thornwood, for perhaps the first time in his 72 years, looked genuinely uncertain. Let him go, Richard said quietly. The guards released Marcus's arms. Marcus turned back to face Richard, who had stepped down from the stage and was walking slowly toward him. Up close, Marcus could see himself in the older man's features, the same nose, the same jawline, the same shade of grey-blue in the eyes. We need to talk, Richard said, his voice shaking slightly. Privately. Marcus considered refusing, considered making this as public and painful as possible. But he thought of his mother, of her dignity even in the face of trauma, of her strength in raising him alone. She would want him to at least hear what Richard had to say. Fine, Marcus agreed. But nothing you say will change what you did. Nothing will bring my mother back or give her the life she deserved. They moved to a private room off the main hall, followed by whispers and stares. Richard's attorney and publicist tried to follow, but Richard waved them off. Just us, he said. I in the privacy of the room. Richard collapsed into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. Marcus remained standing, arms crossed, waiting. Richard started, then stopped. I don't know what to say. The truth would be a start, Marcus said coldly. Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller, without its usual commanding tone. I do remember her. Maya. I've thought about that night more times than I can count over the years. I've told myself so many lies about what happened. That it was consensual. That she wanted it. That I wasn't that drunk. That I misread signals. But the truth is I knew she didn't want it. I knew she was afraid. I knew I had power over her job, her livelihood. And I did it anyway. Marcus felt his jaw clench. Hearing Richard admit it made the anger surge fresh and hot. I've spent my entire life believing certain things about the world, Richard continued, tears now visible in his eyes. Things my father taught me, things society reinforced. I believed people like your mother, black people, were less than me. I treated them as objects, as stepping stones for my own advancement. I never questioned those beliefs because they served me. They justified everything I did. You're a racist and a rapist, Marcus said bluntly. And you think admitting it now somehow absolves you? No, Richard said immediately. No, I don't. Nothing can absolve what I did to your mother. Nothing can give back what I took from her, or the life you both should have had. I know that. But Marcus, as he looked up, and Marcus saw genuine pain in his face. You have no reason to believe me, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything, Marcus said. Sorry doesn't bring my mother back. She worked herself to the bone to raise me. She sacrificed everything. She died young because of the stress and hardship of the life you forced her into. Your apology means nothing. You're right, Richard agreed. It means nothing. But I want to ask you something, and you have every right to refuse. I want to publicly acknowledge you as my son. I want to set up a foundation in your mother's name, not for my image, but genuinely to help women who've experienced what she did. I want to use whatever time I have left to try to do something meaningful, not for forgiveness, because I don't deserve that, but because it's simply the right thing to do. Marcus laughed bitterly. You think this is some redemption story? You think we have a heartwarming moment where I forgive you and we ride off into the sunset as father and son? No, Richard said quietly. I don't think that at all. I think I'm a man who ruined multiple lives through my actions and beliefs. I think I deserve your hatred and contempt. But I also think that hiding from this, denying you, would make me even worse than I already am. So I'm asking, what do you want from me? Marcus stood silent for a long time, thinking about his mother, about the life they'd lived, about the person he'd become despite, or perhaps because of, his father's absence. I don't want a relationship with you, Marcus said finally. I don't want Sunday dinners or to call you dad or to bond over shared interests. That ship sailed before I was even born. You missed my entire life, and that was a choice you made through your actions. Richard nodded, accepting this. But, Marcus continued, my mother spent her last days telling me that anger and hate would only poison my own life. She wanted me to live freely, not chained to bitterness. So here's what I want you to publicly acknowledge what you did. Not some vague statement from your lawyers, but you, on camera, admitting that you assaulted my mother and abandoned your son. I want you to face legal consequences if my mother's evidence is enough to bring charges. I want you to donate the majority of your wealth to organizations that help survivors of sexual assault and support single mothers. And I want you to use whatever platform you have left to actively dismantle the racist systems you spent your life building and benefiting from. And if I do all that? Richard asked. Then maybe, at the end of your life, you'll die knowing you at least tried to make amends. But Marcus Johnson, that's my mother's name I carry proudly, will never be Richard Thornwood Jr. I don't want your name. I don't want your money for myself. I want you to face who you've been and try to become someone different, even if it's too late for it to matter. Richard stood slowly, and for a moment Marcus thought he might try to hug him. Instead, Richard extended his hand formally. I'll do everything you asked. Not because it earns me anything, but because it's the absolute least I can do. Marcus looked at the extended hand for a long moment before shaking it, not as son and father, but as two men acknowledging a painful truth. Richard Thornwood's public confession made international headlines. His admission of sexual assault led to a legal investigation, though the statute of limitations complicated prosecution. Several other women came forward with their own stories about Richard's behavior over the years. Richard stepped down from all his companies, transferred 70% of his wealth to charitable organizations focused on supporting survivors and single mothers, and faced a civil lawsuit that he settled quietly but substantially. The Maya Johnson Memorial Foundation was established with his funding but run by an independent board, including Marcus himself. Marcus used his position to ensure the foundation truly helped people, maintaining distance from Richard personally. They communicated only through lawyers and foundation business, never as family. Richard Thornwood spent his remaining years writing a memoir detailing his crimes and prejudices, with all proceeds going to charity. He used his public platform to call out racism in business and to support legislation protecting workers from sexual harassment. None of it erased what he'd done, and he said so repeatedly. When Richard died 3 years later, Marcus didn't attend the funeral. But he did visit the grave once, alone, and left a photo of his mother there, beautiful, young, and smiling in a picture taken before she'd ever heard the name Thornwood. I kept my promise, Mom, Marcus whispered. He faced what he did. It didn't bring you back. It didn't fix anything. But at least the truth is known. At least he couldn't hide anymore. As Marcus walked away from the grave, he felt neither satisfaction nor grief, but something closer to closure. He'd confronted his father, spoken truth to power, and ensured his mother's story wouldn't be forgotten. It wasn't a happy ending. There could be no happy ending to such a story. But it was an ending nonetheless, and Marcus Johnson, son of Maya, survivor's child, his own man entirely, walked forward into a future he would build on his own terms, carrying his mother's strength and determined to be nothing like the man whose DNA he shared. The reckoning had come, 27 years late. Justice had been imperfect and incomplete. But the truth, at least, had finally been told.